That song applies in many different ways, one of which is that Jesus is actually telling us a story. And I think the point of the story he's telling is supposed to take our story and fold it into his story. And so the more that we understand who Jesus is and what he accomplished, the more that we can understand our own story and how it weaves in and is enfolded into his own story. And so the way that we've been doing that over the past few weeks is we've been examining the final words of Jesus on the cross during this Lenten season. And so I want to continue with the sixth word of Jesus from the cross, the sixth kind of last sayings of Jesus on the cross. And that's going to be found in John chapter 19, verse 29 and 30. It's a very short little text. But in the final few minutes here, I just want to kind of work this out with you a little bit so that we can understand how our story connects and is enfolded into the story of Jesus. But first, I have a confession to make. I stayed up late last night. I don't know if any of you are Final Four people or care or even know what that term means. Because sometimes when I say those things, I just see blank stares, and So okay, I get some thumbs up, some smiling faces. Well, I'm in mourning, so don't smile too much. In fact, this morning I got Christy to the side and I said, "Honey, I have some bad news for you," which was probably not a wise thing for me to do because there's too many bad things that could be that the news could be, and I was like, "Duke lost." And she was like, yeah, that wasn't a good move because it emotionally took her to bad places and she could care less, right? But there is this sense of finishing that happens at the end of a big game if you've ever been involved in sports. If your kids played or you played, at the end of a game there's this sense of a finishing that takes place. And the emotions are different depending on what side you're on, right? If you're on the side that wins, you get to take the big sticker that says your name and slap it on the board. And if you don't watch the Final Four, you don't know what that even means. That's okay. I'll explain it to you later. If not, you just hang your head in defeat. You're 7 feet tall, but you're still weeping, and gnashing your teeth. And you just have to live with the finishing of defeat or the finishing of victory. So that's a big deal. There's other things. Finishing things is just a human reality that we all experience every day. You finish a chore that you've been working on, and there's a sense of, I'm done. You finish the dishes, and you take the towel, and you throw it against the refrigerator, never to return, right? Because it's like, it's done. I didn't want to do it in the first place. But the point is, for me, the bigger the task or the bigger the event, the bigger the emotion or weight when it's accomplished or finished. Does that make sense? You finish the dishes, yeah, there's a sense, but you don't go out in the yard and go like, yeah, I'm done. No, you'd be an idiot if you did. There's other problems in that situation. It's a small thing. You just finished the dishes, but if you win the Final Four game, and you go stand on the top of the bleachers or whatever, and you're screaming, you're waving your shirt, whatever, everybody's okay with it. Why? Because it's a big deal. So what would happen if the greatest thing that had ever been accomplished is over? What kind of emotions do you have for that? And that's exactly what I want to suggest to you happens at this moment in time. In John chapter 19, in just a few verses, it's so small that we lose the earth-shaking quality of what's happening here. This is what the text says. When Jesus had received the wine, he said, "It is finished." Then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Now, I don't know if I can pull out for you the weight and the emotional shaking that happens in these little phrases, but I'm going to try. and as quickly as I can, I'm going to do it in 7 pieces, okay? That sounds like a lot, but it won't be, because I'm not going to spend a lot of time on each one, okay? The obvious question after hearing Jesus say on the cross, "It is finished," is simply this: what is finished? Right? That's the question we have to ask. And so I want to suggest to you this morning, at least 7 things are finished. First of all, the human life of Jesus is finished. His earthly life comes to an end. Jesus will soon be buried. And this is no small event in the story. So you think of the mystery of the incarnation. Now it meets the mystery of the death of the Son of God. And I'm not going to attempt this morning to tease out that mystery. It's too much for us to handle right now. But I just want to press the reality of it. It's important to comprehend this morning that Jesus truly does die soon after the statement. His lungs stop breathing, his heart stops beating, his human brain stops thinking, his body shuts down, and he needs to be buried, like any other Jewish man would have expected after his death. This death is typical, and yet it's staggering all at the same time. It's staggering for many reasons, but one of them is simply for the fact that death for humans means failure. That's what death is. You've lost. Death is loss. It's failure. So another way to think about this is, I like to watch the show Alone with my son Silas. Do you guys know what that show is? It's called Alone. If you don't, basically they take 10 eager, naive people, 10 eager, trained people and they take them to someplace in the world that is in the middle of nowhere, some remote location. They let them have 10 items, and they drop them off, and they see who can last the longest. And it's called Alone, because that's really the point. You're alone for as long as possible until you go crazy or get hurt. And so you watch them, because they have cameras, and you're watching them work through this, trying to, forage for food, try to catch fish, try to hunt, whatever they can do to stay alive, shelter. Sometimes they're in cold areas, sometimes they're in hot areas. But the whole point is they're all alone and they're trying to make it. And the way that you know they don't make it is they have one phone that they're allowed to call and basically say, "I can't handle it anymore, take me out of here." And that means they failed. They lost the competition. And there's, it's like $500,000 if you win or something. And so these people try to push themselves to the extreme, to the very brink of literally insanity, until they can't handle it anymore. And then they take the phone and they stare at it for a while, and they kind of walk around with it, and they go, "I'm going to make the call." And they call and they say, "Help, get me out of here." Now, most people who make that call very quickly start to make, I'm not busting on them, but they start to make excuses as to why they did it. They're rationalizing it in their own mind. The money's not really that important. My family's more important than the money, and I miss my family. Or I really learned something out here. This wasn't about the money. This was about me getting to be one with nature, and I just feel so grounded. I feel so alive for the first time, But get me out of here, But the reality is, if you make the call, you've lost. You've failed the competition. And that's actually how life works for humans. Death is your body and heart and mind admitting defeat. My heart, my mind, my body can't take it anymore. Death signals for humanity the end of life, and therefore the failure of strength and health and resource and hope. And so the truth is that every human, even those of us who begin with difficult circumstances, still every human has a sense that I can go the long haul. I can make this work. I can conquer. I can succeed. We're hardwired for survival. But most of us We know we have about 15 to 25. When you're 15 years old to 25, you have this sense and this idea that you're going to conquer the world. You're going to do great things. You're going to end up on top. You dream visions of success and greatness, great expectations. But at death, they all go away. Even for those who did great things, death silences it all. It's the ultimate failure of humanity. Psychologically, it signals weakness and perhaps even meaninglessness. Physiologically, it signals one's inability to overcome the forces of natural decay. It's the beginning of the decay process. Emotionally and relationally, it signals the loss of friendship and family and all human engagement. Theologically, it signals one's connection to and participation in sin. Since sin is the impetus of our bondage to death, death is the final blow of all that is wrong with the world, all the pain and sorrow and injustice. Death is literally the nail in the coffin of chaos and evil winning the day. And Jesus was about to die. Do you see the significance here? For Jesus, his death was even more significant because he had claimed to be the one who was going to bring in the kingdom of God. Jesus had told his disciples that he was the one around whom the kingdom of God was going to enter into humanity and fix the mess, not just for the Jewish people, but for the whole world. And Jesus was going to die. Now, can you imagine this? If Jesus was who he said he was, and the reason he was on the cross is because of who he said he was. That's one of the reasons he was hanging on the cross, was because of his claims of equality with God. And if he was who he said he was, then this looks to be the greatest catastrophe, the greatest failure known to man, the death of God. Jesus would truly die, and the failure had obvious implications of all that Jesus said he was and what he would do. Now what can he do? After all, he's dead. It is finished. Can you see why the disciples were so struck with confusion and grief? That's the first thing. The human life of Jesus, the earthly life of Jesus, was finished. The second thing was the suffering endurance of Jesus was finished. The cup of shame and suffering, the cup of God's justice against sin, had been drunk down to the dregs. So for Jesus, when he says it is finished, it's not just about his personal suffering as an individual person, but as the representative person for humanity. So when you hear Pilate say to the crowd about Jesus, "Behold the man," you can almost understand that what he's saying is, behold the representative man, the representative human. Behold the human. And I think that if you understand it that way, you get closer to the weight of what is happening here, the reality of what is happening from a cosmic level. Jesus is stepping up to the suffering of the cross as God's representative for the failure of all humanity. Behold the human who will suffer. All the injustice and criminality and rebellion of humanity would be heaped up and taken on by Jesus as he takes the fall on behalf of us all. Jesus, it says in Isaiah 53, bears our infirmities. The suffering servant of Isaiah 53 bears our infirmities. He carries our diseases. He takes the wounding and the crushing in verse 5 of Isaiah 53 that comes from sin. You get the weight of all that? He takes our infirmities. He takes our diseases. He takes the wounding and crushing that comes from sin. He suffers for it all. How exactly this works, of course, is part good theology and part mystery. But what we can say is that there is only one who could take such a massive universal weight of sin and sorrow. It would have to be a divine representative to take all that on, who is able to be drowned in a sea of darkness and destructiveness in such a way as to swallow it up in himself for good. And with this, it is finished. The cup that Jesus had asked not to drink at Gethsemane has been endured and finished off. The suffering and shame of the world that was taken on and endured by Jesus on the cross as the universal representative is done. He has endured it all, and now his endurance was complete. It is finished. I wish I could stop there. It just gets weightier and weightier. Not only that, but the sacrificial work of Jesus as the once and for all sacrifice for sin was finished. It begins with Cain and Abel in the book of Genesis. You remember brother kills brother? You remember this story? Blood is shed, the earth cries out for justice and for peace, but now everything is broken, and chaos and sorrow and pain and suffering would always be pressing in from every side, threatening to swallow up the human race. So substituting the blood of an innocent lamb in the book of Genesis, all the way through the Torah, was somehow woven into the fabric of the natural and spiritual world as a way to push back on that chaos as a kind of temporary, substitutionary cleansing rite. The little lamb didn't deserve to die, but he was a substitute for the broken, sinful humanity that did deserve to die. Does that make sense? So the writer of Hebrews in the New Testament goes to great lengths to articulate the nature of Jesus' death on the cross as the greatest act of sacrifice the world could ever know. Jesus initiates a new and better covenant with a newly constituted people of God, a people who are God's by faith in Jesus and not by their ethnic or moral privilege. Jesus' "it is finished" is a testimony to the once and for all nature of his sacrifice that removes the bondage and power of sin from the people of God once and for all. It is finished. The way the writer of Hebrews says it is he has appeared once and for all at the end of the age to remove sin by the sacrifice of himself. Again, in Hebrews 10, he says, Christ has offered for all time a single sacrifice for sin. So when Jesus says, "it is finished," he's talking about the sacrificial, once and for all work that deals with the problem of sin for all of us. And we go, hallelujah. I only have 5 minutes, but it doesn't stop there, so I'm just going to fly through these. Because I have to say these last ones. The fourth one is the solidarity work of God. It's finished. Jesus hangs on the gallows of human suffering with us. You ever ask the question why we suffer? Perhaps like me, every day. Because I meet people after people who are suffering in all kinds of pain and sadness and sorrow. Has it ever just been too much? Why would a God of love allow such brutality and innocent suffering in the world? And do you know the Bible doesn't answer this question for us? The closest we get is the book of Job. And at the end of Job, no answer is given as to why God, if he is a loving God at all, allows humans to suffer. And so people have tried to take up this question. And the one who did it maybe in the greatest, most profound way was a writer named Dostoevsky. And he wrote a book that tackled this idea. And I'm not going to go into the book. It's a long book, but I'm just going to give you one concept. There's two brothers, and one doesn't believe in the goodness of God, and one is a novice monk. And so they have these conversations about why God would allow suffering. And so the older brother, who's trying to show this younger, whom he considers naive, religious brother, is trying to explain to him the ridiculousness of having a concept of a loving God with such evil and brokenness and suffering in the world. And so he tells 3 stories about children. I'm not going to detail them because they're horrible. There are 3 stories that just make you sick. One is about abuse in the home. One is about soldiers that throw babies up and stab them with spears. And then one is about a little boy who accidentally does something and makes his master upset, and the master sets his dogs on him and they rip him up. He tells these 3 stories to this younger brother to show him the complete ridiculousness of thinking there could be a God of love. And the reality is, it's a good question, is it not? If this question hasn't bothered you, then you're not thinking. You don't have your eyes open to the craziness and the brokenness of the world around us. And the gut punch for this writer, Dostoevsky, is that these stories weren't made up. He took them from newspapers in Russia. These were real stories written in a fictional context so this brother could leverage the weight of the brutality of the human experience in face of the goodness of God. Now, how Dostoevsky deals with this, because Dostoevsky believes in a good God. So how the author deals with it is he doesn't explain it. Just like at the end of Job, there is no clear explanation. What he does is he takes on the figure of Christ himself and begins to move out with love to the neediness around him. What he does in the story is he becomes like a Christ figure to 12 boys who are mourning the loss of their friend. And this demonstration of deep, unconditional love becomes a tangible kind of parable, a tangible answer to the problem of pain. And I think this gets closest to the way that we have to answer the problem of human suffering, because this is exactly what God does. God doesn't send us a verbal answer about why we suffer in the form of an argument. Let me give you propositions as to why I allow suffering and am still good. He doesn't do that. What he does is he sends his own son to enter our human suffering. God enters human chaos and suffering. Instead of ignoring us or just blasting us, he comes to us and suffers with us. Is that not staggering? What does that mean for us? It's because we continue to suffer and weep with those who are suffering, right? Is that not true? This continues on. Well, what that means for us, as one scholar said, it is finished does not mean that suffering and loss and the rivers of tears are things of the past. It is finished means that they do not have the last word. When Jesus says it is finished, he hangs on the cross with us in our suffering and says of sin and suffering and brokenness and chaos and pain and death, does not have the last word. The ultimate act of solidarity in human history is finished. We are not alone in our suffering. Jesus suffered the greatest possible amount because he took in the suffering of the world as God in the flesh. And just so you know, the way that John writes this isn't exactly the way Mark portrays it in his gospel. And this is the 6th thing, or the 5th thing. He says, Mark actually says that he cries out with a loud voice. And so we assume that what is happening in John is this is the loud cry. It is finished. This is not it is finished, a quiet, calm, it is finished. This is a victory shout. It is finished. And Jesus breathes his last. It's a victory shout of death. Jesus gives the victory cry that is his own death. His death is the victory. And there's the irony that flips the world upside down. And then 6, this is the completion of the great project of redemption. When Jesus says it's finished, it means that he completed everything. And this literally changes everything. Now, you've heard that phrase. The commercials use them all the time, right? Community changes everything. This wireless coverage changes everything. This medicine changes everything, right? Have you heard this? It's common. It's on billboard. I see it all over the place. Everything changes everything. But this is really the only act in human history that literally completes and changes everything. The great project of redemption that Jesus was sent to complete is completed. And then 7, the final one. What is finished? Well, the setup for something unexpected by all is finished. The setup is finished. The greatest act of imagination and vindication the world would ever see or would ever experience was just around the corner a few days from then. And this, it is finished, sets us up for something that will blow our minds. Now, I'm not going to talk about that because I'm going to save that for something called Easter Sunday. But just for now, hear the "it is finished" of Jesus echoing like an explosion of grace into the whole world. Even here, 2,000 years later, we feel the reverberation of that "it is finished" in our pain, in our suffering, in our sin, in our fears, in our failures. The cross of Jesus, the sacrifice of Jesus, the finished work of Jesus stands like a lighthouse of solidarity, drawing us into the shores of our true home. With Jesus' finishing work, our true home is once again with God, cleansed by the blood of the Lamb who takes away the sin of the world. So yes, we struggle every day with sin and selfishness and pride and sorrow. Our bodies are breaking down. Yes, we carry the harsh weight of sick bodies and sorrowful souls, but we do not do it alone. And if Jesus took the representative blow for all that is broken and chaotic and harmful and sick and suffering about this life on earth, then it signals that something amazing is just around the corner for us. So here's what I want to say to you. Don't lose hope, my friend. It is finished. Jesus said so.